Shahra's phone vibrated on the glass table in Dubai. Across the city, Ajan's screen illuminated with the identical government transmission. The emergency alert system offered a simple directive: seek shelter immediately. A short time later, the network pushed a second notification. It read, "The situation is safe. You can resume your normal activities." As citizens read those words, journalists standing on the pavement in Dubai looked up. The sharp, concussive sounds of air defense intercepts echoed through the skyline, leaving white smoke trails suspended over the city. At the exact moment those interceptors met their targets in the sky, the water of the Strait of Hormuz was churning. Two Iranian unmanned aerial vehicles descended on a tanker owned by the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, ADNOC. The vessel was attempting to cross the strait. The drones made contact, the metal hull was breached. News networks will log these items into two separate columns today. The Dubai missile alert will run under one headline. The ADNOC tanker strike will run under another. The geography is separated, but the ledger is the same. These are not two isolated events. They are the same moving operation. The core of this operation is not built on the mechanics of drones or the trajectories of missiles. It is built entirely on a single word: ceasefire. We must examine what that word was supposed to mean, how the international community incorporated it into their daily briefings, and how the events of this morning demonstrated its total absence on the water. The timeline is documented. On April 7th and 8th, representatives mediated by Pakistan reached an agreement. Former US President Trump logged on to Truth Social just before midnight in Washington to post the announcement. The terms between Washington and Tehran were singular. The active dropping of munitions would halt. From the moment that post went live, a shift occurred in the global vocabulary. Government press, secretaries, broadcast anchors, maritime insurers, and financial analysts universally adopted the word ceasefire. They began to forecast as if the risk matrix had reset. Transit coordinators looked at maps of the Gulf and began plotting commercial routes. The assumption was that the temperature had permanently cooled. But the ink on the April agreement dictated one physical change. The bombing stopped. The parameters ended there. The Strait of Hormuz remained an impenetrable barrier. Iran kept the coordinates locked. The attacks on commercial vessels did not cease. The logs show impacts continuing steadily through April and crossing into May. The United States maintained its maritime counter-blockade against Iranian ports, a protocol initiated on April 13th. Since that date, U.S. naval commanders have physically turned back 49 commercial ships. Most crucially, the diplomatic paper signed in April left the foundational architecture of the conflict completely untouched. The central dispute remains. When the smoke clears, which flag flies over the Strait of Hormuz? Which navy patrols the channels? What toll is extracted from the cargo? And which central bank prints the currency used to pay that toll? The April negotiations left those boxes blank. Today, on May 4th, 2026, the blank boxes filled themselves in. The sequence of how they filled in is the key to reading the board. On Sunday night, May 3rd, Trump published a new statement on Truth Social. He detailed the initiation of Project Freedom. The text outlined a maneuver where the United States military would physically flank and guide commercial vessels from neutral nations through the choke point of Hormuz. The strategy was labeled a humanitarian corridor. He cited logistical data. Crews trapped on stationary vessels were draining their reserves of food, water, and medical kits. The hardware committed to this corridor was listed: guided missile destroyers, a fleet exceeding 100 aircraft, integrated unmanned maritime platforms, and 15,000 military personnel. The closing sentence established a red line. Any physical interference with the escort would trigger a kinetic response. The sun rose on Monday. Major General Ali Abdullahi stood in front of the cameras on Iranian state television. His statement did not use diplomatic framing. He delivered one sentence to the global feed: "We warn that any foreign military force, especially the aggressive US military that intends to approach or enter the Strait of Hormuz, will be targeted. He did not say intercepted. He did not say cautioned. He used the word targeted. Hours later, the coordinates matched the rhetoric. 2 Iranian drones acquired the signature of the ADNOC tanker, the Baraka. They struck the vessel mid-transit. The cargo tanks were empty. The crew roll call reported 0 casualties. But the diplomatic cables out of the United Arab Emirates did not reflect the 0 casualty count. The UAE Foreign Ministry drafted a response categorizing the strike as an act of terrorism. They cited chapter and verse of UN Security Council Resolution 2817, highlighting the specific clauses guaranteeing freedom of navigation. Jassim Mohammed al-Budaiwi, Secretary General of the GCC, issued a release calling the strike a treacherous maneuver. Then, Sultan Ahmed al-Jaber stepped to the microphone. He holds 2 offices, Chief Executive of ADNOC and UAE Minister of Industry. He bypassed the standard maritime vocabulary. He stated the Strait of Hormuz must never be held hostage. He stated the right of navigation is non-negotiable. He stated the alteration of the Strait's legal status is a dangerous precedent. Look closely at the architecture of his statement. These are not the phrases a minister uses to describe a logistics delay. A scratched hull on an empty tanker does not trigger the word hostage. This is the terminology of a state apparatus that has absorbed physical impacts for 65 consecutive days while watching international monitors classify their airspace as a ceasefire zone. Following al-Jaber's statement, the sirens in Dubai triggered. 3 Emirates registered the alert. The physical thud of interceptions vibrated through the concrete. The all-clear sounded minutes later. Observe the juxtaposition of that morning. Project Freedom was active on the water. The US military social media accounts were actively broadcasting the successful transit of 2 escorted vessels. While the posts went live, an allied state oil tanker absorbed a drone strike. 3 Emirates scrambled for shelter under falling debris. In the afternoon press briefings, the morning was logged as a successful operation. The gap between the press release and the radar screen is widening. 2 ships passed. 1 was hit. The sky caught fire. To evaluate the ADNOC strike as a solitary event is to misread the entire theater. The UAE Ministry of Defense maintains the ledger of the air war. Through April 9th, the tracking systems recorded 537 ballistic missile launches originating from Iran. They logged 2,256 drone incursions. 26 cruise missiles crossed the airspace. The physical toll is documented on the ground. 13 fatality reports. 224 hospital admissions. Intercepted debris fell through the roofs of residential zones in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. The exterior of the Burj Al Arab took structural damage. The tarmac at Dubai International Airport sustained a direct impact. The shipping containers at Jebel Ali port burned. The cooling systems at an Amazon Web Services data center failed after a strike. Look at the aviation logistics. During the peak exchange, the departure boards at Dubai International Airport went dark. 82% of all outbound flights were grounded. An infrastructure node designed to cycle passengers to 291 global destinations flatlined to 18% capacity. All of this data was generated and recorded during the window of time the global community refers to as a ceasefire. Stephen Innes, managing partner at SPI Asset Management, distributed a note to investors today. The language he used bypassed the political rhetoric. He wrote that Washington and Tehran are not engaged in diplomacy. They are locked in a stare-down. 2 central banks, keeping their hands hovering over the terminal, waiting for the other to flinch. The pressure is held just a fraction of an inch below the line of formal declared war. The boundary is probed and struck every single morning. Today, the boundary buckled. The commodity markets operate strictly on mathematics, not press releases. The algorithms had already calculated the risk premium before the drones even left the launch pads in Iran. CNN data streams confirmed the trend. The moment Trump uploaded the Project Freedom mandate, oil futures spiked. The trading floors looked at the military commitment and immediately priced in the reality that the structural control of the Strait remained unchanged. Domestic gasoline indexes in the United States shifted. Prior to the escalation, the national average sat at $2.98. The current readout is $4.46. The predictive models from Lipow Oil Associates were handed to CNN. The math is rigid. 30 more days of a closed strait pushes the pump price to $5 flat. That number mirrors the historical ceiling hit in June 2022. We are arriving at the absolute core of the architecture. The sequence of events this morning is not fully explained by drones hitting steel. Iran is operating on a dual track. Track 1 is kinetic striking ships. Track 2 is bureaucratic. Iran is pouring the concrete for a permanent legal and financial foundation built directly over the Strait of Hormuz. The drone strike on the ADNOC tanker is merely the physical enforcement of the new paperwork. In Tehran, the parliamentary chambers are drafting legislation. The objective is to permanently codify Iranian sovereignty over the waterway. CNN cross-referenced the drafts with Iran's state broadcaster and statements from Vice Parliamentary Speaker Ali Niksad. The text is absolute. Israeli-flagged ships face a permanent, non-negotiable ban. Vessels registered to hostile nations, the explicit legal classification for the US and allied states, are required to wire war reparations into Iranian accounts before a transit permit is generated. All remaining global vessels must submit a formal application and receive explicit authorization from Tehran for every individual passage. This is not a temporary emergency protocol. This is a sovereign state rewriting the maritime law of a global artery. They claimed the coordinates on March 4th. They have spent the subsequent weeks enforcing the new borders with ballistics and establishing a toll collection system. On Sunday, 24 hours before the Baraka was struck, Iran's deputy parliament speaker delivered the mandate. We will not back down from our position on the Strait of Hormuz, and it will not return to its pre-war conditions. There were no clauses attached, no timeline for expiration. The old conditions are dead. On Monday morning, the drones hit the ADNOC hull and the Dubai sirens engaged. The label of ceasefire is an administrative fiction. The bombing runs did not restart, but the label generated a false map of the territory. It allowed logistics planners to draft manifests based on naval protections that evaporated upon contact. It provided politicians a screen to project stability to their constituencies. It instructed trading algorithms to price in a normalization that never materialized. Every time the reality of the Strait asserts itself, a tanker takes a hit. A city goes under shelter, orders, warning rounds, skip across the bow of a destroyer, a cruise missile tracks a South Korean cargo ship. The administrative fiction fractures a little more. Today, the fiction shattered completely. Look at the calendar. May 14th is 10 days away. Air Force One will fly from Washington to Beijing. Trump will enter the room with Xi Jinping. The leverage he carries into that room has fundamentally changed. He is not the executive who cleared the Strait of Hormuz. He is not the commander who reestablished the freedom of navigation. He is the executive who launched Project Freedom on the exact day an Allied oil tanker burned in the water and a global financial hub ducked under interceptor fire. The intelligence files in Beijing are updated. Xi Jinping has the logs. CNN's coverage today included insights from sources within the Chinese state apparatus. The consensus is unified. The friction in the Gulf has directly compounded Beijing's negotiating weight. A foreign policy advisor at Fudan University provided a direct quote. He stated, "The geopolitical board has aligned favorably for China. Count the days of the ceasefire. 26 days. That is 26 days of uninterrupted assembly time for Beijing. Assembly of a parallel financial clearinghouse anchored in the Gulf. Assembly of digital ledgers that process transit tolls in yuan instead of dollars. Assembly of priority routing for Chinese flag tankers bypassing the blockades that trap Western hulls. assembly of the exact leverage Xi Jinping will place on the table on May 14th. The impacts on the Baraka and the sirens in Dubai did not break the ceasefire. They merely illuminated what the ceasefire was built to be, a shift in diplomatic phrasing, while the mechanics of the war continued to grind. The next 10 days dictate the trajectory of this conflict. Shift the focus from the water to the ledgers. The drone strike is designed for the camera lens. The legislation moving through the Iranian parliament is designed for the history books. The two tracks are welded together. The mainstream monitors are tracking the smoke and missing the paperwork. The parliament in Tehran is legally cementing its borders over the Strait. CNN's confirmation of the 12-point legislation outlines a total rewrite of the global supply chain. Banning Israeli hulls, taxing allied hulls, mandating authorization for all others. Consider the mechanics of the old system. The pre-war architecture was built on a simple premise: freedom of navigation. A ship casts off, plots a course, and sails through international waters. No toll booths, no permission slips. 25% of the global seaborne crude and 20% of the liquefied natural gas move through that corridor on the honor system of international law. It was backed by 7 decades of treaties and the physical presence of the US Navy. That system is currently being erased. The replacement model centralizes all authority. Iran controls the gate. Iran collects the tariff. Iran issues the pass. Iran fires the missile if a ship breaks the sequence. The Baraka was the demonstration. The ADNOC vessel navigated into the channel without logging into the new Iranian coordination framework. The response was mechanical. The drones launched. The hull was hit. The message transmitted across the maritime frequencies was absolute. Bypass the gate, take the strike. The strike occurred in plain view of the US destroyers assigned to Project Freedom. The destroyers watched it happen. The financial structure supporting this new gate is the final component. The blockade is not just a military operation, it is a revenue stream. The transit fee is logged at over $1 million per vessel, but the invoices are not settled in New York. They are not settled in dollars. The accounts receive Chinese yuan. They receive blockchain transfers. The payment rails are explicitly engineered to remain invisible to US Treasury monitors. Al Jazeera cross-referenced the shipping logs in late March. 2 massive commercial vessels completed their transit. The receipts were cut in yuan. The Ministry of Commerce in Beijing verified the data. The Iranian diplomatic mission in Zimbabwe publicly advocated for the petro-yuan to replace the petrodollar in the global oil markets. The Strait of Hormuz is operating as a live laboratory. It is a proof of concept for a global energy market that does not require the United States dollar to function. Every tanker that clears the strait using a yuan-denominated transfer provides a new data point. It proves the alternative system works. The longer the laboratory stays open, the harder the concrete sets on the new financial rails. China stands at the end of the line, collecting the dividends. In March, Tehran released a list of 5 nations granted unrestricted access to the strait. China occupied the first slot. While the Baraka takes drone fire, Chinese VLCCs, very large crude carriers, glide through the corridor untouched. They load Iranian crude at severely depressed prices. The digital banking infrastructure of Beijing handles the toll conversions. For 65 days, the foreign ministry in Beijing has maintained absolute radio silence on the matter. Treasury Secretary Bessent took the podium in Washington today. The transcript of his briefing lays the current balance of power bare. He directed a statement at Beijing. He requested that China deploy its diplomatic weight to open the strait. He confirmed that Trump has placed the same request directly to Xi Jinping over secure channels. Analyze the geometry of that request. The United States Treasury is publicly asking China to assist in opening a waterway that Chinese vessels currently navigate without friction. A waterway operating on a toll system powered by Chinese currency. A waterway governed by a priority list with China at the top. And in 10 days, the US president boards a plane to sit across from the Chinese president to negotiate the terms. The intelligence sources speaking to CNN confirm the reality in Beijing. They view the timeline as an absolute victory. Georg Wuttke, former head of the EU Chamber of Commerce in China, summarized the backroom consensus circulating through the think tanks. The sentence is simple. The United States is fighting without winning, while China is winning without fighting. The missile alarms in Dubai, the burning deck of the ADNOC tanker, the inaugural run of Project Freedom, the administrative fiction of the ceasefire, they are all identical data points on the same line graph. The graph does not measure who controls the water. It measures who holds the cards when the doors lock in Beijing on May 14th. The sequence of events this morning provided the answer.